In most Zelda games, the world map would fill in automatically as you entered new areas. But even prior to Breath of the Wild, some games like Majora's Mask and The Wind Waker already experimented with different methods to uncover the map gradually. In this case through NPCs who are designed in a way that they stand out and are easy to spot from a distance. The Sheikah Towers essentially served a similar purpose, with the added bonus of acting as a fast travel point. And due to their size and the fact that they emit an orange or blue glow, they catch your attention from pretty much anywhere on the map. When it comes to the sequel to Breath of the Wild, the footage we've seen so far shows that the Sheikah Towers, as well as the shrines and the divine beasts, seem to be a thing of the past. Even the Sheikah Slate has eluded us so far, causing many, including myself, to believe that Link's new spectral arm will serve as the replacement for Hyrule's first smartphone, at least when it comes to Link's new abilities. But the Sheikah Slate also doubled as the game's excuse for the map and fast travel mechanic. As of right now, we don't know if we need to unlock the map of the surface all over again in the sequel, or if this will only be reserved for new areas, like the sky and the underground many have theorized about. Regardless, if the towers and shrines are truly gone, there needs to be at the very least a new system that can replace Breath of the Wild's map function, as well as its fast travel points, which were conveniently spaced out all across Hyrule. Which brings us to
the Zonai.
As much as the Zonai have become a meme in the Zelda community at this point, it doesn't change the fact that there's still plenty of reasons to believe that something related to them will play a role in Breath of the Wild 2. Whether it's the abundance of Zonai architecture seen in the first teaser, the dragon head mounted on Link's shield, and even the green glowing arm could very well be connected to them in some way. Still, to make the video more bearable for some of you and to distract you from the fact that this is a Zonai related theory, I will mostly refer to them as the Backstreet Boys for the remainder of the video, because similar to the Zonai, they too are a relic of an age long forgotten. And if you're wondering why I own one of their CDs, well, it's because... Shut up, I just do, alright? Let's not get into details here. Despite their disappearance, the Backstreet Boys left behind a lot of interesting architecture, and one of them in particular could be of more significance in the sequel, that being the towers. There's something very peculiar about these structures. Not just the fact that we know next to nothing about them, but if you've read Creating a Champion, you'll find that the towers we see in Breath of the Wild weren't actually supposed to look like this. Instead of stark and basic columns, the original designs all feature a prevalent and stylish dragon motif, similar to some of the other structures like the mazes and some of their statues. What's even more interesting, and equally confusing, is that the in-game version of the towers have decorations on them that are not consistent with the barbarians of Faron, and thanks to the efforts of others like Lorulian Historian, it has since come to light that these ornaments are linked to the Hylians instead. If you visit Hyrule Castle, more specifically the hallway leading to Ganon's cocoon, you'll find pillars that have identical decorations on them. The overall design of some of the pillars is also quite similar to the towers, a hexagonal shaped column which gets wider at the very top. This has led some to believe that the towers are actually supposed to be Hylian made, and that some of them, like the ones in Faron, could have been built on top of older, pre-existing ruins. There's definitely a case to be made that these towers are indeed of Hylian origin. Despite the fact that 4 of them are found on the outskirts of Faron, the majority are actually located in central Hyrule, close to the wetlands. In the Age of Calamity DLC, we are given the opportunity to visit Gopanga Village, a Hylian settlement situated in the wetlands and which was destroyed by Ganon's army in Breath of the Wild's timeline. There's only 2 towers left standing in the wetlands themselves in Breath of the Wild. But as you can see in Age of Calamity, there were actually a lot more of them all across the village. And not only are these in pristine condition without moss and ivy covering them, but they still feature that same Hylian crest. Even if you don't accept Age of Calamity as canon whatsoever, it's still a bit strange that the majority of these towers are found in central Hyrule, which is not considered to be Backstreet Boy territory by any means. There's no other ruins related to them in this part of the world, and on top of that, places that do, like Typhlo Ruins for example, don't feature any of these towers. But as is often the case with Zelda theories, there's also a different side to the story, things that contradict the Hylian tower idea. First is the obvious fact that despite the inconsistencies see in the decorations, creating a champion does still refer to them as Zonai towers regardless. And second, there's one specific tower whose location raises a lot of questions. This outlier is found inside the Hebra mountain range. It's already a bit unusual to find them in such a remote location. But what's even more strange is that this one is half submerged in the middle of a lake. This implies that it was built before the lake was formed, and also means that this entire waterfall probably didn't exist yet, which I can imagine is a very long time ago. While there are ancient Hylian structures that are as old, if not older, than those made by the Backstreet Boys, the decorations on these towers are modern Hylian, not ancient Hylian. Ancient Hylian ruins have ornaments and crests of their own, some directly copied over from Skyward Sword, which is a neat little touch. And well, as you can see, none of them match with the ones from the towers. Instead, the tower crest falls in line with the style seen at Hyrule Castle, which I consider to be modern Hylian. It's also worth noting that the Hylians weren't really all that active in the Hebra Mountains. Aside from a wooden cabin, which looks to have been built post-Calamity, their closest settlement was Tabantha Village, which is still a long ways away from the mountain range. At the very least, we can say that the Hylians didn't have any stonework in this area. No garrisons or statues or anything like that. But you know who did? The Backstreet Boys. Not only do we find one of their mazes here, but they also constructed 2 stone doors leading into the mountains, which feature their recognizable serpent engravings, so there was definitely some activity here. All this conflicting evidence makes it kinda hard to put a definitive stamp on who was responsible for the construction of the towers. But you know what? It's very much possible that none of this even matters. Because the more I looked into it, the more I get the impression that the towers we ended up getting in Breath of the Wild are not the ones Nintendo initially wanted to include in the game, and are instead quick and dirty replacements. I find it highly suspicious that not a single design we find of them in creating a champion even comes close to what we ultimately see in-game. They are much more detailed, and as mentioned before, they all have a clear motif related to dragons. Now, a lot of the concept art in the book actually features notes from who I presume to be one of the lead artists. Most of these are feedback and requests to make certain changes, and one of the artworks has these types of notes attached to it, asking the artist to change some of the details. It really seems like they had a pretty clear idea of what they wanted the towers to look like. So how did we go from this, a fully detailed dragon-style tower which actually coincides with the building style of the tribe who made it, to this, a boring pillar with zero connection to dragons and a crest on it that doesn't even belong? Of course, the easiest explanation would be that they simply ran out of time and took a pre-existing model, changed it up a bit and slapped it into the game as a replacement. The 3D modeler responsible may have even forgotten to replace the texture, hence why the Hylian crest is still there. Alternatively, they could have concluded that the fancy design seen in the concept art would stand out too much and detract from the Sheikah towers. I mean, it's clear from the size comparison alone that they were supposed to be a whole lot bigger than the ones we ended up getting. But what if there was a different reason? What if they left out this design because they wanted to save it for a future story implication? Perhaps DLC, which, may I remind you, Breath of the Wild 2 was initially intended to be. There's several hints that Breath of the Wild 2 story events will have some sort of connection to the ancient dragons. As I discussed in my previous video, they often disappear into a portal in the sky, and in the sequel we see a sky realm that seems to be invisible from the surface. At the end of the second teaser, Zelda's lullaby is played by the same instrument used for the dragon's music theme. Then we have these enigmatic robot creatures who also feature elements of dragons. And of course, as mentioned before, all the Zonai related stuff. A tribe who had a clear fascination with the ancient dragons, particularly Farash, who makes frequent appearances in the Faron region. And yes, I'm calling them Zonai again from now. I think the joke has kind of run its course. Anyway, what I'm trying to propose is that the Zonai were well aware of the sky portals as well as the existence of the sky realm, and they themselves may have even found a way to travel between the surface and the heavens by constructing magical towers. Not only are the Zonai described as having been powerful magic wielders, but the description of the towers themselves state that they said to have been used for magic purposes. A statement like this doesn't just come out of nowhere, and in fact nothing in the actual game suggests that the towers had magical properties. For all we know, they were simply yet another ancient ruin with a chest on top and nothing else. We know that the writers of creating a champion were given a pretty extensive insight into the ideas and thought process of the Zelda team. It's how they got access to all this concept concept art, notes, as well as quotes from the developers themselves. In fact, the book reveals quite a lot of details that are never actually seen or mentioned in the game itself, and couldn't possibly have been known unless the Zelda team itself informed the writers about it, like how the Guardians emerged from the columns at Hyrule Castle during the Calamity, an idea which was actually used in Age of Calamity 2 years after the book was published. As such, I think it's plausible that the Zelda team had bigger plans for actual magic Zonai towers, but weren't able to implement them because of either time restraints or because they simply didn't fit Breath of the Wild's story at the time, and might have been put on the shelf for later. Story-wise, I personally think they would be very fitting. I find it quite fascinating how the original tower designs depict not only dragons, but specifically dragons pointing up towards the sky, almost as a representation of their ascent into the heavens. The Zonai could have constructed these towers not just to honor the dragons, but also with the purpose of traveling to the heavenly realm, and the so-called magic they used could be related to Link's new ability seen in the second teaser, where he ascends rapidly and then phases through the floor of one of the floating islands. I actually made an entire video devoted to this mechanic, where I explain some of the details based on information inside one of the patents issued by Nintendo. Inside the patent, it says that in some specific scenarios the ability can be used to reach locations very, very high up, basically without a height limit. I theorized that this is how we'll be able to travel between the surface and the islands in the sky, and I also mentioned that there might be something akin to pedestals on the surface by which we can do this. Well, what if these towers are going to be exactly that? I noticed that one of the designs has a disc-shaped platform on top, divided into rings. And I don't know about you, but to me this looks eerily similar to the platform we see Link standing on in the new footage. Here too, we see a circular floor design with multiple rings. Also notice how in the background we don't see clouds or a blue sky, but rather what seems to be a landscape. It's obviously very blurry due to the camera's focus, and it could very well be one of the sky islands. But what if this platform isn't in the sky, but instead Link is standing on top of one of these new Zonai towers on the surface, and it's from here that he'll be able to use his new ability to travel further up into the sky realm. Of course, that does beg the question, if these towers do indeed exist, where are they? Why don't we see them in Breath of the Wild, nor in the sequel footage? Well, the latter is quite obvious, since Nintendo is known to hide or omit certain things from their promotional material. I mean, just look at how they purposely left out Terraco from the first Age of Calamity trailer. As for why they weren't in Breath of the Wild, well, my best guess would be that they are probably hidden underground, similar to the Sheikah Towers, and that at some point in the story they will emerge from the earth. Either all of them simultaneously, or maybe we need to activate them one by one. It could even be one of the objectives of going underground to begin with. By traveling below ground and activating a new tower there, it'll rise up to the surface, and doing so will grant access to new islands in the sky which were previously unreachable. Not only would it be a great way to connect the underground, surface, and sky, but it also allows the developers to obstruct certain parts of the sky in a natural way. A way for the player to unlock new areas bit by bit, instead of making every location accessible from the get-go like in Breath of the Wild. So to recap, I believe that these are not the quote-unquote real Zonai towers, and that the ones we see in Creating a Champion are, and might show up in the sequel as both a replacement for the Sheikah towers, as well as a way to travel between the surface and the sky. If this ends up being true, it would be yet another case where Nintendo's future plans are hidden inside their concept art, just like we see with Link's arm, as well as the broken Master Sword. Anyway, that's enough Zonai for one video. I want to quickly let you all know that in the coming days I'll be making a community post in which I will describe the details about the 100k subscriber special, which as always will have audience participation. I'm running a bit behind on it, so I apologize for that, but I really wanted to make this video first. Now that that's done, I will be working on the special starting next week, so I hope you look forward to that. Again, be sure to check out the community post if you'd like to have a chance to join in. A big thanks as always to my Discord mods and to those who support the channel financially. You are all the best. And that is all for now. This is Don signing off, and have a good one.